When he was winning motorcycle races worldwide in the 1970s, you either wanted to meet or you wanted to be Barry Sheene. He was an idol to all, making motorbiking exciting, fun and sexy, and becoming the first sporting Playboy superstar. But his 2 world championships came at a horrifyingly high price, with 2 devastating and very public crashes. The cheeky Cockney created the glamorous lifestyle that we all wanted, with the money, the cars, and of course, the girls. He was a born winner, a consummate publicist, who was the first to play the media at its own game, becoming his very own brand.
Of course, I ought my Brute 33.
Though hating school, he discovered a talent for foreign languages, useful for chatting up the girls and being nice to the press. Barry Sheene became a global superstar, more popular than ever, but never family's background guaranteed that there was no way the young Barry would not have become involved in motorbikes, with Father Frank making sure that bikes were in Barry's blood before he could even walk.
Dad was involved with motorbikes from when he was younger, before he was married to my mum. His brother used to race. I think he raced Speedway, one of his brothers, but Dad was always into bikes. He used to ride in the Isle of Man, at the Clubman's TT, and so we used to get dragged to the Isle of Man.
Franco raced motorcycles both before and after the war, but he found his métier in preparing motorcycles. He was an absolute born tinkerer, and he was damn good at it. So people would come in increasing numbers to Frank to get their motorcycles prepared. This is the world that Barry was born into.
Barry Sheene was born in the evening of September 11th, 1950, and he soon became a typical little brother.
It's a pain in the arse. He was always ill. No, he was born with infantile eczema, and after that left him with asthma. So sort of the first few years of his life, he scratched himself, and then after that, he coughed. So he used to get a lot of attention.
Frank Sheene's job as maintenance engineer for the Royal College of Surgeons in London's Queen Square meant a comfortable Holborn flat for the Sheene family with a yard and a workshop, allowing Frank to indulge his motorcycle ambitions. Riding and working with the Spanish bull taco bikes gave Frank the nickname of Franco, and he was quick to give young Barry his very first bike.
Franco built him a little thing. At first, he wasn't allowed to change gear. He went up and down the yard, had a little 2-speed gearbox.
While family life may have been happy for him, school was not something Barry took to. In fact, he used any excuse to bunk off class.
He used to use his asthma attacks to have time off school.
He suffered from asthma, and during one of the regular appointments, he was left unattended in the surgery for a bit, and there was a pile of appointment forms on the desk. And I was showing an early grasp of how to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Barry pocketed a whole lot of these, and from then on he had an asthma appointment every Wednesday. He was off school down to Brands Hatch.
So with Wednesdays off school at Brands Hatch and weekends spent at circuits such as Snetterton and Mallory Park, Barry was well on his way to learning the skills that were to help him become world champion, with the Sheene family becoming a familiar sight at the circuits.
I will have met Frank. I would have been talking about Frank Sheene rather than Barry Sheene, because Barry Sheene was a little boy. But I remember Frank and Iris. They were a typical racing motorcycle family of those days. They would come and have breakfast, which they would cook themselves at the circuit. And they had this little boy with them, who was a very bright and lively chap. So I suppose Barry must have been about 6 or 7 when I first met him.
Franco's involvement with the Spanish bull taco bikes meant holidays spent in Spain, and watching the home movies of these holidays from the 60s brings back happy memories for Barry's sister Maggie.
Oh. Barry started smoking when he was about 11. First time he got caught smoking, he told Mum and Dad that I'd given him the fags.
But the main reason for Spanish holidays was for Franco to participate in the 24-hour race in Montjuïc Park in Barcelona. Local contacts there gave him the opportunity to become British importer for the Spanish Bultaco motorbikes. So holidays in Spain not only meant young Barry learnt a little Spanish, but he also got to grips with the new 125 and 250cc lightweight two-stroke Bultaco bikes. Back home in England, Barry practiced his riding skills in the fields surrounding Alton Park, as seen here in films shot by a proud father. But there was still the small matter of leaving school and getting a job.
He left school the minute he could leave school, he left, because he hated it.
He got a series of jobs. He rode a messenger bike for an advertising agency, first of all.
He did a bit of lorry driving.
He worked on a car lot with a friend of his.
He did a bit of furniture delivery.
But all this time, he was also very much involved in racing. Even before he left school, he'd gone away for a spell of European races with an American rider.
But really, I suppose his passion was to ride. Once he got to 17 or whatever, that's all he really wanted to do.
Franco's home movies from this period reveal a side to Barry's riding that not many people know about.
Trials riding. I never knew Barry rode in trials.
I used to do this. I had a bull taco.
Did you?
Same thing, yeah, trials.
I
That's
used
how
to do
started.
it. I mean, I should think Frank must have been absolutely overjoyed, because here was someone following in his footsteps and obviously going to be doing it even better than Frank did, because Frank was a handy rider, but he wasn't a genius. Barry actually started his career by accident because he was a sort of gopher for his dad. Frank is a very talented tuner and engineer, and he used to get Barry to test the bikes that he had prepared.
For some reason, he never really thought about racing himself until the beginning of 1963, when Franco had the new year's Bultacos come in, and he wanted to see how they went. He went down to Brown's on a Wednesday afternoon, and there was no one else to ride them except Barry. Somebody said, "Give Barry a go." And that was his first ride. People said he looked so smooth and fast, said to Franco, "Give him a go on a race," and that was it. He came second in his first race, fell off for the next one, but that was the start of something absolutely amazing, because that's what people said at the time. In racing, 1 minute Barry wasn't there, the next minute he was winning everything.
But with Barry riding an X-Works Yamaha at circuits such as the Austrian Grand Prix at Salzburg, where fellow rider Jarno Saarinen was also riding a Yamaha.
At the start, it's the Yamahas of Saarinen and Sheene which go out ahead.
Barry had to retire from that race, and his luck with the Yamaha was patchy all year. But his riding skills had brought him to the attention of Peter Agg and Maurice Knight from the newly formed Suzuki GB, who were looking for riders to become part of their works team.
He won a lot of races, and so Maurice Knight, I think, was responsible for suggesting that perhaps we sponsor one or two of these riders with bikes and spares, which we did.
The move to becoming a works rider on properly designed and built and prepared machines with all the support that a works can give you is an absolutely enormous leap. Barry had shown that he got gigantic talent and had been enormously successful at national level, but there's a very big difference between that and racing against the top world championship people of the day.
Front of the grid, Reed, Agostini, Bonera, Sheene.
Barry's first Grand Prix on the new Suzuki RG500 was at Clermont-Ferrand in France in 1974.
Sheene flies ahead. MV, Yamaha and Suzuki fight it out. Phil Reed roars home to win on the MV. Barry Sheene comes second for Suzuki.
Phil Reed won the 74 World Championship, but Barry vindicated Suzuki's trust in him by coming a healthy sixth. Barry was coming to grips with the international circuit in more ways than just racing, as he found his affinity for languages was useful for more than just talking to the press.
La agua 105 grados, toda la carrera. Y yo más lento, más lento, más lento. Y... Oh, thanks, Rob.
He needed to learn languages because he liked to be able to speak to ladies, of course, you see. So that was his main reason for picking up a language, so he can chat up to ladies.
Barry had this charismatic personality. He was, I wouldn't say he was handsome in a film star way, but he was certainly a gigantically attractive personality. He was a public figure, and the women absolutely adored him. And this being a family show, I'm not going to tell you some of the things I know about Barry Sheene and women, but you can imagine that they were exciting, dramatic, and extremely energetic, and very frequent.
Close friend and Suzuki teammate Steve Parrish remembers how important the ladies were to Barry when he's asked exactly how Barry Sheene prepared for a race.
About 26 fags. A shag if you could get one in the morning, probably. And turn up at the start, making sure that the wheels are always in line and the mechanics have done all their job.
Barry had always been attracted by the glamour of the track from boyhood, and especially by rider Bill Ivey.
Bill was everything Barry wanted to become. Fast cars, girls, the Cockney in the heart of fashionable London. It gave Barry something to aim for.
As one of Frank Sheene's bull tackle riders, Bill had known the young Barry very well in the early 60s, the two of them seen here together at Montjuïc Park in 1961. But just how great an influence Bill Ivey was on Barry was illustrated by his reaction to Bill's tragic death in 1969.
Absolutely traumatic, absolutely traumatic. Barry had a very serious attack of asthma when he heard the news, and it affected him very deeply. He considered chucking racing in altogether.
Barry had become the racing idol he aspired to, becoming the cheerful Cockney lady killer with all the trappings of a 70s sporting superstar. But did Barry become an icon to a younger generation himself?
Yes, he created the sort of the image of the hero in every respect. And when you're 15, 16 or whatever, and you just bought a moped, you know, you think you're Barry Sheene, you know, you go out there and you think, oh, you know, what a great way to live. That's the way to be.
By 1975, the new Suzuki RG500 had seen through its stormy adolescence of breakdowns and failures of the previous two seasons. Rider and mechanics knew the bike was a winner. 75 was going to be the year, so everyone was very much on a high on an early visit to the Daytona track in the US. Daytona's high banking makes it a unique and dangerous circuit, and team manager Merv Wright made sure that Barry was aware of every risk.
The track guy said to watch going into the south banking and coming off the north banking. He said it's still damp out there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, I was at the right end of the pits with Merv Wright, and as he came down, then something happened which post-mortem suggested was to do with the tower. The bike turned head over heels and threw Barry considerable distance down the track. I'm not really sure. You know, you see these things, it's all over in a flash. And I'm not sure whether he was actually hit by the bike. He might have been, but it all happens terribly quickly.
A British TV crew filming Barry's practice laps ensured that a worldwide audience witnessed the horrific high-speed crash. Barry slid 275 yards on his back, losing so much skin it threatened his kidneys, and breaking his right collarbone, 2 ribs, his right arm and left thigh.
It was a gigantic hammer blow, not just to Barry, not just to British motorcycle sport, but to world motorcycle sport. Even in his hospital bed in Daytona, Barry was giving interviews and telling people how it was. And in those days, that was something entirely unique. And I remember watching the news and seeing Barry Sheene lying in his hospital bed and saying what had happened at a time when you would have expected him to be lying there and feeling sorry for himself and saying nothing. Amazing.
As it is at the moment, they just drilled the bone underneath my knee and put a rod through it and stuck it in traction to keep the bones apart and make it straight. Then when they've pinned that, it should probably be 6 weeks or a couple of months, then it'd be okay again.
Barry's road to full recovery was overshadowed by a worry that took him back to the operating theatre, an event he also realised that would be a useful tool in promoting his newly found celebrity status.
Ever since I broke my leg in Daytona, it's been on my mind that if I was to crash and in fact break my leg again in the same place, it'd bend the pin, and then it is a major problem to get it out.
This is the fracture that Barry sustained originally, and we move on here to the situation where he's had a nail put in it, and now the fracture is united, and what we're going to do is remove this nail.
The surgeon, he'd got a pair of pincers or something on the end of this pin, and he was literally hammering the pin. You could see it coming out, and they produced this great long pin, and I was sort of, not on the verge of fainting, but I was feeling very, very queasy indeed. But yes, you're right. Only Barry would have said, why don't we have someone in watching the operation? That would be good, wouldn't it?
It was while recovering from his injuries that Barry was to meet the future Mrs. Sheene, and a sporting superstar meeting a glamour model was a match made in heaven.
I was talking to my agent. She said, oh, you've got to get some new pictures done for your book. And I said, well, I've got an idea, actually. I saw this guy on the television. He had these really coloured motorcycle leathers. This would make a really nice picture, I think. And she said, well, who was that? So I said, Barry Sheene. She said, oh, well, I know his number, and I rang him up. He said, oh, well, come over to the house and I'll bring the leathers down and da-da-da-da. And I said, oh, well, you could just leave them there if you like, and I'll just pick them up. You don't have to be there. And he said, oh, no, I'll be here. So that's how I met him.
Stephanie changed Barry in lots of ways, because he wasn't chasing other birds as much, because he fell in love with this beautiful model, and he'd kind of got to the top of the tree. He'd got pole position there and then.
And pole position it was, when incredibly, after only 3 short months after his horrific Daytona crash, Barry won his first ever 500cc championship race at the Dutch Grand Prix at Assen.
I told you I could do. Yeah, now.
But Daytona had finished any dreams he may have had about becoming world champion in 1975.
Oh, I'm so knackered.
Well, 1975 ended with the bike ready for the next stage. 1976 started, and Suzuki had done a lot of work to the bike, exactly what Barry had wanted, and he came back to the Grand Prix where he was now familiar with all the tracks and all the ins and outs, and absolutely ran away with it. He was unbeatable.
In 76, the determination was written on his forehead, I'm going to make up for 75.
Well, I'd be really, really happy to win the World Championship if it's at all possible. I just hope that I don't fall off or hurt myself. If I get to the end of the year and I'm not world champion and I'm all in one piece and I'm happy, then that's okay.
Ironically, first stop in '76 was Daytona, where Frank Sheene filmed the opening gambit of Barry's championship year.
Barry, yeah, at that time, Barry's car was a Rolls-Royce in England, so he'd obviously contacted Rolls-Royce, and yeah, you can do that in the States.
He liked the British image, that was good. I think Rolls-Royce got a bit cheesed off when he got some big fat alloy wheels for his roller.
This is Barry's bikes, TR750, 1976. Three-cylinder. Barry, prior to moving out onto the circuit with the large sevens.
But yeah, look how relaxed all that is. Everyone just wandered up with a pair of jeans and a T-shirt on.
Back on the European 500cc circuits like Mugello in Italy, Barry was now rubbing shoulders with his old heroes, like reigning world champion Giacomo Agostini. As the race began, the expectations of Agostini's home crowd were high as they witnessed one of the most thrilling races of the year. It went down to the very last, as at the checkered flag, Barry was just 1/10 of a second faster than another former world champion, Phil Reed. Celebrations were to continue throughout the 1976 season. Barry was untouchable, winning 5 out of the 6 Grand Prix he entered. So total was his dominance on the track, Barry didn't even need to enter the last 3 Grand Prix of the season to finally achieve his ambition of becoming the 500cc world champion.
He was winning, you know, he was winning every race practically, and it was, he was the hero of the day in every country, and no matter where he went, they all wanted him to win for some reason, you know.
He had some classic races. That's not to say that he didn't, that it was a cakewalk, that he wasn't up against a high standard of competitor, but he won it as though he was meant to.
In '77, after winning 6 Grand Prix, Barry easily kept the World Championship title for a second year. With that success came even more fame, and Barry soon realised that he had become a brand in his own right.
Barry Sheene could have sold himself very well himself. I mean, he was brilliant at that. He just didn't have the time. He was going motorcycle racing. We had a reputation. We were already doing a good job for James Hunt. So he thought, well, they're the boys. They're very similar, actually, James and Barry, in a lot of ways, although from different educational backgrounds. And I think James had said, you know, they're good people, they'll do a job for you, and that's what happens. And almost immediately we were getting him deals with Texaco. We did a Sun column for a number of years. We even had a Barry Sheene magazine for a while. That worked well. And of course, the famous deal with Fabergé and many subsequent deals.
Now that's Barry Sheene on number 7. He's a man to watch here. Look at him go. Whoops, God. Now you know why he's been world champion 2 years running.
Of course, I alter my Brute 33.
Go on, Steph, splash it all over. Nothing beats the great smell of Brute.
But by 1978, Suzuki had a new rival in a new, more manoeuvrable Yamaha bike. And Barry had a new rival in the form of the rider who would become his greatest rival, American Kenny Roberts.
From reading the reports about the racing before I come and kind of trying to visualize what I had to beat in Barry being world champion, was it appeared that he had the best equipment and he could ride it better than everybody else, and it was fairly easy. And I suppose that all changed when I was able to start winning races.
That year there was a particular crucial race, and in a way events played into Barry's hands in terms of his own credibility, although they played away from him in terms of the championship. This was at the Finnish Grand Prix, and at the end of practice, Barry reported to his Suzuki mechanics that there was a bit of a rumble in the main bearing. He wanted the engine changed, and the Suzuki mechanics declined to do this. One can only imagine that it must have been a hell of an argument, but anyway, possibly for the first time ever, they said, no, Barry, this engine does not need changing. In the race, it failed. And that cost Barry enough points to really hand the title to Kenny.
He had some very bad races. That's when he developed the flu, and he could have very well had the flu.
Oh, chronic fatigue syndrome time that was, wasn't it? Well, he got a virus, Epstein-Barr virus, what they call, and he just went from pillar and post to try and get it sorted out.
They said it was a strange kind of virus that makes you come second and third instead of first, but it became more plausible when Barry got better at the end of the year. If he didn't have a virus, he certainly did recover from something, but it was too late.
It was at this time that many riders on the Grand Prix circuit were getting increasingly concerned about track safety, as a former Brands Hatch 350cc bike champion remembers.
Motorcycle racing was more dangerous than car racing. In fact, it seemed to me that more people got killed in cars than hurt. But you were guaranteed injuries with bikes. That was the difference. You know, I've got a broken collarbone. That was the only thing I got in my career in racing bikes. But I never broke anything in a car.
After the slide down the Daytona track had ripped off much of the flesh from his back, Barry had created a back protector for himself, a safety innovation he quickly passed on to others.
They gave me my first back pad, and I wore it. I cut it down. It was quite big. His was quite big, and I cut it down and made it smaller, but I wore it, probably won the World Championship with it first year.
But Barry also got together with some of the riders to try to achieve a more lasting change to the safety aspects of the circuits.
We've cut out some of the circuits that are very dangerous, like the German Grand Prix at Nürburgring. I'm sure you know Nürburgring, where Nicky Lauda was really badly injured. Yeah. It's terrible to race a motorcycle.
Very long circuit.
Long, and pine trees and barriers and God knows what. So we're obviously going to have a lot of fights this year with the people that organise the races, but
you'll definitely be out there having a go.
I'll be out there having a go, yeah.
Together with other riders, Kenny and Barry instigated a new motorcycle World Series to rival the existing governing body, the FIM.
We needed to change the system. The FIM at that time was not running the races properly and not doing anything, basically, which is what they do best.
The reason the World Series came about was because we were all fed up with seeing mates die. It was very dangerous. It was ridiculous, really.
In the meantime, the racing continued. After losing the '78 championship to Kenny Roberts, Barry was keen to regain his crown, and events came to a head at the '79 British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
If you said to me, name just one exciting motorcycle race that you have seen in your career, without a shadow of doubt, it would be Kenny Roberts on the Yamaha in 1979, against Barry Sheene on the Suzuki. Now, Kenny was racing against double world champion Barry Sheene. As I say, they were great mates. It was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
In typical Sheene fashion, Barry popped a massive wheelie off the grid in front of his home crowd.
When I would lead, we'd speed up. When he would lead, we'd slow down. And I knew I couldn't just run away and hide. There's no way I could get away from him. He knew there's no way that he could get away from me. So we ended up, like, sort of egging each other on.
Everybody else had just disappeared into the background somewhere. And you had these two absolutely superstars racing against each other at record-breaking speed safely. And they passed and repassed each other. And every time Barry got past Kenny, the crowd would, if they weren't already standing up, they would stand up. And you really could hear the crowd shouting above the noise of the engines.
What was bothering me a little bit, middle of the race, was, hey, speed up. So I'm going, get going, because, they're catching us from behind. The more I don't, speed up, then that's when the hand signal started happening.
And I remember at one point in the race, they went out of one of the corners, and Barry had got greater momentum, and he got past Kenny, and he looked over his shoulder, and he put his hand up behind his back, and he gave him two fingers like that. And I remember saying in the commentary, and look, Barry Sheene is waving at Kenny Roberts. Well, he was giving him the two fingers, actually, but I couldn't say that at the time.
Silverstone, there was the famous wave to your...
Harvey Smith wave.
Very good. How on earth do you have enough sort of cool to do all that?
Well, it's, at Silverstone, for example, I was having a good race with Kenny Roberts, and around the back of the circuit where there were no cameras, he was doing all kinds of things to me, you know, in a funny sort of way.
I knew that it was going to come down to the last lap, and I was either going to get second or get first. And I think Barry probably knew the same thing.
And they got interfered with by a back marker, and people don't remember it these days, but the back marker that got in the way was George Fogarty, and George Fogarty was Carl Fogarty's father.
I mean, Dad was going well in the race, actually. He had a problem with the bike. He went on to 3 cylinders, there were 4-cylinder Suzukis, and he was still running around about 16th, 17th, and he got lapped off Barry and Kenny Roberts. And Barry being Barry, and like I was the same, you know, I never lost a race. It was always an excuse why, and it was the same with Barry, you know, he kind of said, oh, George Fogarty got in my way.
George Fogarty got in the way, as a result of which Kenny pulled away a bit. Barry closed up, and he took the outside line at Woodcote, and they went across the finish line like that. I don't know how much difference there was in time between them, but it must have been just a few hundredths of a second. Fantastic race.
And an incredible end. Do you ever dream about that afterwards, that maybe if you'd had a few
No,
more,
I tell you what, it does.
few more revs? Or...
Well, it does happen. Every time I see a video of it, I keep thinking, well, maybe I'm going to win it this time. It looks like it gets closer and closer each time.
But Barry's mechanic believes that there was a distinct plan to that race, one that would help promote Barry and Kenny's World Series aspirations.
They were going to put on basically a show for everybody to see by doing, for the part of the race, some of the most spectacular racing that the world would probably ever see on television. They had got an agreement as to when the race would start, and that wasn't at the first lap. The race started for them 5 laps from the end. Lap 25 was the race, and 5 laps they just went at it even faster than what they'd put on the show for. To give that show for the first 25 laps, then give a second show, it was like an encore. So that was the greatest race. But what they were doing is, to the sponsors, Marlboro especially, that's what we can do, boys. Do you want any more of this?
And with the benefit of hindsight, the post-race interviews do demonstrate that Barry and Kenny had the World Series very much on their minds.
Well, it couldn't have come much closer, I suppose. It was good, though. Yeah, good on Kenny. He rode really good.
Now, the final question, of course, this could be the last British Grand Prix we see held under the FIM. We hear that you are amongst the leading riders that might go in for the new World Series. Is this correct?
Yeah, I think it'll be a much better race next year.
You, Barry, think we're going to see you racing for World Series next year?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not.
What actually happened was the federation, the incumbents, the status quo was preserved because of the power they had over circuit organisers. And in the end, the World Series found that they had nowhere to run their races. The tracks were all terrified of the establishment. And there was a final meeting called where all the riders got together and to announce this to them. And some of them wanted to carry on fighting. They didn't understand that it was over. But Barry did, but nonetheless, he tried to rally, he went along with the mood, and the Dutch rider, Will Hartog, was one of the first to get up and walk out. And as he left, Barry famously called out to him, and he said, Will, and Will turned and said, what is it, Barry? He said, how can you walk without a spine? Famous Barry remark.
Barry wasn't to win the '79 championship, and the next year he was to race a Yamaha as he became more and more disillusioned with Suzuki.
Yeah, '79. Yeah, we were having a divorce. The team were.
Well, the crucial moment was in October of that year, around about the time of the Earls Court Motorcycle Show and the Motorcycle News Man of the Year Awards. Barry was engaged in negotiations with Suzuki, and he was being very hard-nosed, and they weren't getting anywhere. Morris Knight later told me that he and his directors had agreed that perhaps Sheene was not essential to the team, having now been beaten 3 years in a row. Barry and Morris Knight bumped into each other on the way to these awards, and Barry was wearing a Yamaha T-shirt. And Morris Knight said he made a jocular remark saying, what do you think, Mattership, Morris is sort of going to be wearing next year? Morris replied, if you wear that T-shirt to the dinner, it'll be the most expensive T-shirt you've ever worn, because they hadn't paid his full contract fee. But Barry being Barry, went ahead and wore it, Suzuki cut off the remainder of his balance and stopped negotiations. There's a strong feeling still within Suzuki that Barry was taken by surprise. He thought he was just being cheeky. He thought Suzuki would do anything to keep him, and he misjudged the situation.
He figured the bikes that were beating him with Roberts, the Yamahas, he could win a world championship on a private motorcycle.
When he first signed for Yamaha in 1980, they were just production bikes from Mitsui Yamaha in the UK. And I think Barry probably overlooked a little bit how bad those production bikes were, or how good the factory bikes were. And finally, he did get some good bikes out of Yamaha, but it was pretty late in the day to get them. And unfortunately, the accident at Silverstone cut it all short because he'd sorted that bike out. And I think, truthfully, he would have won that race there that year and probably gone on to win the World Championship.
His '82 Silverstone crash again put Barry in the headlines for all the wrong reasons.
The day before the Grand Prix, Silverstone threw the circuit open to everyone, all comers.
Barry, in his endearing way, blagged a marshal into letting him go onto the circuit when it was either just about to be closed or just had been closed. Because he'd got the bike almost right and he just wanted to do this last check, and he went out for a final lap.
Somebody crashed and the bike was in the track. Barry came over the brow of a hill or over a blind rise, and there was the bike in the middle of the track. He had nowhere to go. He just hit it and took off.
I mean, it literally looked like a plane crash. There was fairings and pieces of motorcycles laying everywhere. And the first thing I did was go to Barry, because I couldn't see anybody else, just debris. And, you know, at that time, just try to do what I could, or what you know to do, what I picked up over the years, is remove his helmet. And I thought he was dead. You know, there was no way that you're going to survive all that and be alive.
Kenny's actions in all likelihood saved Barry's life. When his bike was smashed apart by the impact, Barry received many injuries, the most serious being to his left hand and both shin bones, which were completely shattered.
When I saw him the night of the crash, he was very ill, and I thought I wouldn't have been, you know, I thought, Christ, this is serious.
I was really quite concerned. That was the only time I've ever sort of thought, oh my God, something, you know, he might not survive this, because he was really, really knocked about, really knocked about.
The X-rays of Barry's legs became an iconic image of the Meccano Man, as Barry now became known. Amazingly, Barry was out of hospital after only 23 days, leaving wife Stephanie to pick up the pieces.
That was a real terrible time for us because he couldn't walk, and he's not a very good patient, you know. I can remember having to get him up and down the stairs in the morning. Me and Franco would have to carry him down. I remember one day I'd got him into the bathroom. We lived in our house was very long. I got him in the bath. I said, "Are you going to be all right here for a few minutes?" "Yes, yes, I'll be all right." So I left him there with all his shaving stuff at his mirror. And so I went down to the kitchen and I started doing a few bits of washing and that. And I just forgot about him. And I could hear, "Stephanie!" I thought, oh my God, I've forgotten all about him. And it couldn't have been for that long, because, you know, I wouldn't have left him like for an hour. Came running up the stairs and he was screaming at the top of his voice, and he was sitting there in the stone cold bath, so he said. It wasn't that cold. Couldn't reach the tap to put more water in. He went bloody mad.
But Barry was also mad at the Silverstone authorities, at whose door he laid the blame for the crash because of the lack of flag marshals.
Very angry against Silverstone indeed, and was eventually got a big payout from them. The amount was never revealed. It's believed to be in the region of about £300,000, I believe, because of their well, it never came to court, so. But he alleged negligence. There weren't enough flag. He hadn't been warned. If there'd been enough flag marshals on duties, he could have been warned of the crash just over the brow of the hill.
For the 1983 season, Barry returned to a Suzuki bike, but things were never to be the same again.
Barry never did as well with Yamaha and after that with Suzuki as he had done in the mid-70s with Suzuki when he got his 2 world championships. And it wasn't his fault. in neither case subsequently were the bikes good enough against the competition that he was up against, because he was up against Kenny Roberts on the Yamaha. But it didn't stop him from coming back after that dreadful crash and going on for another couple of years.
But by 1984, an older and wiser Barry had decided it was time to settle down and start a family.
So we decided, right, going to try for a child, and we said, well, we have to get married then. So we got married in secret up the road. Nobody there. No fanfare.
9 months after getting married, daughter Sydney was born to Mr. and Mrs. Sheene. But by the end of 1984, the new father announced he was to quit racing.
I thought he'd probably retired a little bit early, but that was his decision. He'd probably fed up with beating himself about. He was, you know, it was a bit of a mess, and if he had any more accidents, it was going to probably finish him forever, you know, type of thing. He was rather fragile with his pins and screws in there, and I think he just genuinely realised that he wasn't going to get the best equipment anymore, and he didn't want to race unless he did have.
Sydney had been born, and he just realised that he'd had his day, I think, and that was a good time to bow out.
Although Barry had tried his hand at saloon car racing and even truck racing, it was Australia's Gold Coast that appealed the most to Barry after a friendly beetle had shown him the way.
He went to Australia at the behest of George Harrison, actually. George Harrison had bought a place on Hamilton Island, and he went over with George to the first Australian Car Grand Prix as a guest, and then went to Hamilton Island with George, and he just loved it.
I remember talking to him in the paddock there, and I said, what do you I love Australia, and I said, what do you think of Australia then, Barry? He said, oh, fantastic, mate, absolutely fantastic. And he realised, being the bright lad that he is, that if he went to Australia to live, he would have a climate that was going to be kind to his body as it got older. So he upsticked and took the whole family and Steph's family over to Australia.
He got himself straight into television work out there with the local guys who were doing the national racing series. And then also they started covering the World Series here, and he got himself embedded with the networks pretty well. And again, he was a witty guy.
It was Commodore versus Falcon at Bathurst, and I can't remember what the episode or the incident was, but there'd been some, you know, either spectacular crash or something quite amazing happened on the track. And Baz said, what if I said, Falcon unbelievable? And we all just looked at him, and I said, I dare you, Baz, come on. When we come out of the ad break, I dare you. We're always doing stupid things like that. And sure enough, when we came out of the ad break, I said, you know, this has happened and that's happened, and Barry goes, yeah, Bill, Falcon unbelievable. And you could hear people gasping for breath, you know, all over in the control rooms and everywhere, and I don't think we had any complaints about it. It was just very clever, and there was stuff like that going on all the time.
A successful commentating career, a high-profile advertising campaign for Shell Australia, as well as other successful business interests, meant life was good for the Sheene family, especially with the arrival of son Freddie. But all too soon, Stephanie noticed that all was not well with Barry.
Well, he'd had trouble swallowing, you know, and I used to say to him, it's only because you're gulping your food. He used to eat his food really quickly and he used to get there, and he couldn't get it down. That went on for a while, and he used to drink a lot of water with it. He rang the doctor and they arranged for him to have an endoscopy, or whatever they call it. They took us in a room, and the doctor, he just said, look, mate, you've got cancer. You know, there's no way I'll tell you, you know, you've got cancer. And he just drew it from him. He had it in his esophagus and his upper part of his stomach.
In 2002, Barry made his last trip to the UK for the classic Goodwood racing event.
We got to talking about the problem he'd got, and I said, what are you going to do about it, Barry? And he said, well, I'm not going to let them cut me up, Murray. Operation. He said, I'm not going to let them poison me, chemotherapy. But whilst that was a very sad experience, because you had the feeling that you were seeing the last of a truly, truly great person and personality, it was also a very uplifting experience, because that weekend Barry rode again against Wayne Gardner, 2 races, and Wayne won one and Barry won the other, and Barry won the other by enough of a margin to win on aggregate. And it was a very fitting end to a truly great rider and a truly great person's career.
Barry Sheene died on Monday the 10th of March 2003. He was 52.
Motorsport is something where people are coming and going all the time. I've been involved with motorsport now for 81 years. I'm 83 years old, and I went to my first meeting when I was 2 years old in my mother's arms. So I've seen a lot of them come and go, either through natural retirement or, sadly, because they've been killed. And usually the waters part and they disappear, and you don't forget about them, but you don't actually miss them. But I certainly cannot say that about Barry Sheene, because above all, his personality allied to his success and the way he achieved it made him, in my experience, someone who was truly unforgettable.